Hello again, Halo YouTube community. I am back with yet another video. Today I'm going to be answering a question that I get asked from time to time on my stream when I'm breaking down pro gameplay. And that question is, hey, oddly, on such and such map, which strongholds are the best to hold? And my answer to that is always the same thing. And that answer is that you're asking the wrong question. And I'm going to pull up attack maps. I'm going to switch over to that so you don't have to stare at my face this whole time. But like you'll see E United, for example, like to playing C and B as their primary hold. Like they tend to try to hold this setup quite a bit. And I'm here to explain today that trying to hold two strongholds and just setting up around those two strongholds and playing only for that purpose is misunderstanding how to play strongholds correctly. And it's actually holding your team back if that's your general approach to the game. And there's going to be some caveats at the end of this. Like everything I'm about to say is not really intended solely for solo queue, and I'll go a little bit more in depth about that later in the video. But for right now, when it comes to winning at strongholds, there's two things that are very important in Halo and competitive gaming in general, and even like chess, that are very key to determine the difference between winning and losing in a game of strongholds. And the first of those two is the concept of Strongside versus Weakside. And I have a little playbook from Madden up here because you see, for example, a strong side run on a generic drawn up play where you have more players on this side of the center. So there's a better chance that you're going to be able to overload that side. Whereas if you were to run, say, a counter play where your running back goes toward the left side, you'd be running toward the weak side where you have more chance of the running back running straight into a defender that he doesn't have a blocker to help him with. Now, how does that relate to Halo? On strong side, obviously you have more numbers, you have a higher percent chance of winning fights or at least having help in whatever fights you're playing. And when you have that like almost guaranteed numbers advantage, you should play aggressively. You should be actively seeking to fight people, actively seeking to capture objectives. And at any given time, if you're on the strong side of the map, you should be playing for pushes. And switching back to the attack maps here, let's say hypothetically you've got C stronghold controlled and you're trying to push B and you don't have A. You can leave a player lurking at C while you send 3 people to B, and that makes B your strong side. So you should be actively pushing that. Like if C is the only side you have, but you don't want to completely abandon C in this process because every now and then you may see somebody try to flank, and this is what the weak side play comes in. And we'll switch back to little slideshow here. Weak side, you don't have much chance of getting help, and if you die, you leave either the stronghold or that lane open. You shouldn't be exposing yourself to free damage, and you'll notice with the attack maps here, I have the player that's lurking C positioned in a way that if someone just runs into C, like you can be back tower, you can be all the way back tower, like back river, you can be just hiding on these sides of stairs if you expect the player to be coming from dummies. But in general, you should be in a position where anybody coming to that stronghold from an expected route won't see you, so they think they can commit to the stronghold and then just try to capture it. You'll see this a lot out of Hysteria from Complexity as a great example of a player to play this, but he's just sitting there lurking. Well, some people call it ratting. I know Tony calls it playing cringe, but whatever you choose to call it, your job is just to be a difficult kill and to stall or buy time for your teammates to get back to you. There's a really good chance you'll be in a 1-on-2 situation or a 1-on-3 situation from time to time. And it doesn't really matter if you die. Like, granted, you shouldn't be trying to die, but your job is to try to buy time if you're the player on the weak side. Sometimes you can play weak side a little more aggressively, and I'll show an example of that. Let's say you're in an oddball situation instead of strongholds, and you've got the general C tower set up, and you've got a player just sitting B, like way out in the open. And again, this player shouldn't be like pushing these lanes to go look for fights. He's just waiting for people to pass him because he's weak side. He's not really likely to get help while his teammates are trying to close these lanes. So his job is to just lurk and wait on somebody to pass him and then look for the fight. If you're lurking B stronghold on this and your team are either pushing A or pushing C and you have B, generally you'll see that player somewhere behind spikes, lurking around here, or maybe they're a camo player looking to get a flank. Either way, they're not trying to reveal where they're standing, so they don't end up getting engaged upon before someone has committed to being in the stronghold. And the other thing to note, if you are on Weakside, you'll always want to pick up whatever grenades are nearby. This is why C and B strongholds are really good for lurkers in live fire specifically. Recharge, it's a little more dicey. There's plasmas beneath A, or usually you'll see a player that lurks A have the sword, or a player just lurking in control with sword. But either way, whatever CQB weapons or grenades you can pick up, those are huge for your ability to play Weakside, because those change the chances that you can win a 1-on-2 situation or stall even longer, because you can just grenade choke points and prevent people from pushing. The other concept to talk about is tempo, and it's a term that applies pretty often in chess, pretty often in volleyball. In this particular instance for the GIF I provided, you see black makes a tempo play where white leaves their queen out in the open, and then you see the knight gets pushed, so that knight is now attacking the queen. White cannot make any move they want. They are forced to make a move that moves this queen next to get it out of trouble. And in Halo, you'll see two different types of tempo both be relevant. And in volleyball, tempo refers to how fast the setter is setting up a play, like every now and then. And if you've ever seen the anime Haikyuu, you've definitely got this down pat, because they go over that throughout an entire season talking about tempos. But there's a quick attack being a fast low set aimed to just immediately spike the ball as soon as the setter gets to touch it. Slower tempos, they allow the enemies or the defenders to get more in position to try to block anywhere the spike may come, but it also gives the team spiking more options for where their spikers can go. And a slowest tempo just sort of resets time. So like if you were having a hectic defense, you just set a really high set in order to reset the pace and allow your own team to get ready to play defense again if your spike doesn't work, which if you have a really slow tempo set, it's a lot less likely for your actual spike to be playing for a score. And in chess, tempo generally refers to if a move is gaining or losing tempo. And as with the GIF on the previous slide, you saw the black player was playing a knight that would gain a tempo, forcing the queen to move, and plays that lose a tempo allow the opponent to make a move that then puts that high value piece under attack and then forces you to react to that. So you never want to make a play that loses tempo unless there's a very good reason. And a lot of times in Strongholds, people make plays that are constantly losing tempo plays. And I'm going to switch to Street Strongholds to give an example on this, where let's say you don't have B, you have C, and then your opponents have B, or have A rather, and you see someone is capturing C as you spawn in somewhere around Cafe. And the negative tempo play in this situation where you lose a tempo is to go try to defend the stronghold you already have that you're losing, because this player already has time gathered on that stronghold, and more than likely this is now their weak side of the map because they are pushing C. And if there's any fight going on at B, then you can almost guarantee that A is either open or there's only one person around there. So the better play to make is almost always to go to that stronghold and try to backcap. Like, you'll generally get yelled at by your teammates being, hey, you're opening up spawns, you're blocking spawns over there, you're going to make them spawn over here. But they're already capturing this, so you should not be making a play that loses tempo. You should be making a play that matches tempo in order. You do not want them to have this fully captured before you've ever started to capture A. Like, there should be some progress on that before the play is completely resolved. And if you come off spawn and try to get to C and you don't make it in time, one, they capture that, and then two, you're in a one-on-one fight where it's likely to be a 50-50 coin flip fight. And if you don't win that fight, then now you're on the back foot because you've lost A and C, and now those players can push off C to go for B. And then regardless of where you spawn, you're behind tempo on capturing and you're losing points at that point. Going back to the slideshow here, a little bit more on tempo. What is tempo in Halo? And like I said, both of those apply. The chest variant applies when you're reacting to strongholds, as I just demonstrated on the streets map. You can either be rotating late to contest or starting a capture of an abandoned side well after your opponents have secured theirs. Like, say they capture C in the example above, and you wait until they finish C to finally be like, oh, well, I guess I'll just go capture A. Well, at this point, they're already pushing B, and you're not going to be in position to reinforce that fight, so you have lost a tempo. If you're the first alive in an enemy territory, like say enemy team has just completed a trip cap, and this is something Cloud9 are really good at. I'm going to switch to Recharge for a really good example of something they do pretty frequently. Say your enemy team has just finished a trip cap, like they just finished capping A, they just finished capping B. They already had C, and so that spot's open, and your team spawns like long haul or spawns in C. If you're the first player alive, your job is not to start recapturing this stronghold. Because if you do that, you're not getting space on the map. You're leaving all of this beyond open for the enemies to push back and either trap you in C so that they can get those kills, reslay, and then retake C while then forcing you to spawn over here, and it's just a spawn cycle over and over again. Or they're just going to kill you while you're capturing it because you haven't gone anywhere, so they can just get on you as fast as possible. And then they just keep the trip cap. So if you are the first player coming off the spawn in Strongholds, and again, Cloud9 are very good at this. There are other teams that are good at it, but it really stands out with Cloud9, where if you're the first player, you can run through the Stronghold and start that progress, but your job is to start pushing out and let the players coming off spawn after you start getting that Stronghold, so you can protect their path. Because if you've got a player that's either pushed up into control or pushed into the tower or whatever, there's a better chance that you can fight on equal footing because you've got a little bit of a better concave, a little bit of better positioning on the map in order to fight from. The other area, where the volleyball variant, comes in terms of preparing to make pushes. If you're all alive and you don't want your opponent to have time to react, like maybe they are 2 or 3 dead, then you want to be making quick attacks. You want to keep tempo. You want to keep pushing with your strong side, while your weak side just make sure you're not losing territory. Your weak side player is controlling what you already have and continuing to influence spawns to try to make sure the enemies don't just spawn on a stronghold and immediately flip. It's not always a possibility, but generally speaking, you should be playing to keep what you have and force your enemies more in a corner than directly on a stronghold. But if your team are 2 or 3 dead, then you want those sort of high set volleyball plays where you're waiting on your teammates to spawn before you then push again. Like if both teams are 2 or 3 dead, or if you're the last alive and there are no members of the enemy team alive, you still don't really want to push for a new stronghold because you could be throwing away spawns. You could be forcing the enemy to spawn somewhere that is actually beneficial to them. You just want to kind of wait and play a wait and see approach and then adjust accordingly. So you reconsider whether you're weak or strong side relative to your opponent's living members, and then make your plays based off that. Like there are times to be a slow tempo play in Halo, but generally if you have numbers, if your strong side is pushing their weak side or wins a fight dead on against their strong side, you play fast tempo and keep pushing and keep capturing things, and just don't let your opponents react to you off spawn. Don't let them decide the pace of the rest of the map. And then the question back to, do you set up for 2 strongholds versus trip caps? The entire like which 2 stronghold setup is the best? Like when you apply those 2 concepts to strongholds, it becomes clear that just holding those 2 setups, that This is very common with E United that I've mentioned. Like on recharge, they're very happy to hold A B and just force people to spawn C. On live fire, they're very happy to hold BC and just leave A open. But the thing that happens is that eventually your opponents get up tempo plays and they can break your setup, and then they have a trip cap, and you're then forced to be either killed off spawn on A, killed off spawn in dummies. Maybe they open up B so they can go get camo, and then they push back. You've captured B, but by the time you come to push, they've got a camo advantage in the push, and everything falls apart from there. So the right way to play isn't really to hold a specific two stronghold setup, although like yes, there are definite two stronghold sets that are better than others, especially at any given time. But it's also more dependent on your enemy's positions, where your teammates are positioned on which is stronger at any given time. And it's also possible for both sides of the map for your team to be strong side at a moment. Like, for example, let's say you've got one player alive in C, 3 players alive in B. Enemy team is 1 player dead, and then they've got 1 player just sitting top middle and 2 players on A. Your team has a strong side that can push to A, and then you've got a one-on-one towards C, where this enemy's not going to get any reinforcements, more than likely, because the closest possible spawn would be Needler for him to get the reinforcement after this fight resolves between your player and that player. And because of your positioning, you're likely to be in a better position against the player that's pushing. So you are actually in a situation where it's double strong sides. And after this fight resolves, you can push off wherever you want to, or just let your team keep flying, and you get the trip cap and transition from there. But if you play a passive defensive oriented setup around two strongholds, your teammates can just play to execute breaks, and generally that means, like, I'll give an example from both live fire and recharge on things that I've seen before on this. On live fire, if you've got a sort of BC setup, you'll generally have somebody in B, somebody on nest, and 2 people playing around tower. If you can force the player on nest to be just back down into nest, it opens up free routes for people to push through bottom middle and get back tower, while the rest of your team push either through top middle or that. You just ignore B and then capture C and transition from C to B, because then you have a high ground push toward B. By then your opponents are spawning A, they have to capture A at a negative tempo, and you're fighting with your last guy at B, and everything's broken at that point. And all it takes is backing down this player to open up those lanes, because you don't ever have to push off of this commando elbow. You just overload C side, because you know someone has got to be watching B. So once this player's dead, then, or not even dead, just back down, then you've got at worst a 4-on-2, at best a 4-on-3 fighting for C. And I said I'd also give an example on recharge. A lot of times on recharge, you'll either have a player glass or up on bat ledge. Other people are in A. All it takes is backing down this player off bat ledge. A couple of shots, he's forced to back off. A couple of shots in a player glass, they're forced to back off. And you can just push off of that and like either get into A, where you then have a 4-on-2, because you can push off of control over A ledge, since no one on glass is able to watch you, no one on bat ledge is able to watch you, and you can just push across bottom middle to camo boxes and get into whirlpool and just fight from there. And you again have a 4-on-2 in A. They then have to either push back into A at a numbers disadvantage, or just take the consolation prize to C, where they have a really long, slow rotation. And chances are, if a team is happy with an A-B setup, they don't want to go to C, because they know that's a bad spawn to be in. And it's also a hard place to fight out of if you don't just like focus on backing those players down first. And so those are those 2 examples. And then again, if you go for that sort of defensive setup, once they've gotten that up-tempo play off of the push where they capture your stronghold, they still have theirs and you're capturing it late on a negative tempo play. They get the second stronghold, they leave someone to lurk at the one they stole from you, and then they just hard push back to the one that you're late capturing, clean you up after you finish capturing it, they push for the trip cap, and their lurker starts resetting everything behind it. you get trip capped on, you start getting spawn cycled, and that's the better way to play Strongholds rather than just playing those passive defensive oriented setups. Now, back to the caveats. If you are a solo queue player, like a lot of times I will see people posting on forums or on Twitter talking about their solo queue teammates just don't have any idea how to play Strongholds. They're like, oh, they keep flipping the spawns, they keep pushing, and everything's spawning behind me, and we lose what we had. If you are playing with a group of people or a bunch of randoms that do not understand the concepts of Weakside, Strongside, or Tempo, or they just don't communicate, or they can't be trusted to get any kills on their own, it is absolutely a better call to just sit on 2 Strongholds, to just play to keep everything in front of you, make it very easily understandable and predictable what's going to happen for your team, and to just reduce that level of chaos and just play to coast rather than play to push for an advantage. Because this is strictly for if you know you are able to win and be better than your opponents. And in solo queue, that's not necessarily going to be the case in a lot of situations. Like, there are a ton of times where your teammates are going to feel like sandbags tied around your ankles, cement shoes, whatever you want to call it, and you're just trudging through mud. And if you try to play this way in Strongholds, it can just be exacerbated even worse. But if you think you can win one-on-ones while playing Weakside and do that, like, there's a slightly better chance it will work. But again, I would still just recommend playing the more easily predictable method of sitting on a 2-cap Stronghold and not trying to push for more than you have to. That summarizes everything I wanted to go over with this video. I hope this has been educational for you. If not, well, you're probably wrong, because this is exactly the approach to Strongholds that I tried to instill with the Team Liquid players when I worked with them. And as you see, at the very, very top level, the teams that are best at Strongholds, Optic, Cloud9, FaZe, Sentinels, those 4 teams all play based off of these concepts. Whether they consciously or unconsciously realize it, I don't know. But the players that I worked with Team Liquid, I made sure to discuss it this way, because they constantly asked me, hey, is it, like early on in Halo 5, they were like, hey, are trip caps low-key really good? And I was like, if you have the opportunity to go for them and then play around spawn cycling from there, absolutely. And I constantly made a point to highlight that there wasn't really a 2 Stronghold setup that was reliably able to be held, so there's no point in just sitting on 2 Strongholds. You play based off where your opponents are, where your teammates are, whether or not you're stronger in a lane than they are, and just know whether you are strong or weak side. If you're weak side, play like a bitch, hide, don't look for fights. If you're on strong side, soar at them, just destroy them with your guns, outshoot them, outkill them, put them on spawn cycles, and just go for the trip cap from there. And that is all for this video. Again, I hope you guys learned something from this. I hope it is something you can adapt into your play, even though, again, with solo queue, it is not really a great thing to try, but it is the right way to play Strongholds. With that, you guys have a great day. Stay hydrated.